What's the most messed up thing you've ever walked in on? Story 1. I was babysitting two boys age 8 and 10. I hear them both giggling in the bathroom, and so I open the bathroom door, and the 8-year-old was on the toilet, bending down, while the 10-year-old was holding a paper plate behind him, and the 8-year-old was pooping on it. I yell, "What the heck are you doing?" The 10-year-old steps away, deer in headlights staring at me, while holding the paper plate with a turd on it. The 8-year-old nervously piped up and attempted to throw his older brother under the bus. He started to panic, and he stammered while saying, "It was an accident. I didn't know what he was doing. He just told me to bend over." Story 2. A walking-in story from a party I was at when we were all about 17 to 18. A couple hours in, and everyone had turned in except for one of the birthday girl's best friends. She eventually calls and says she's out at a club, and can she bring the guy that she's met, whose name is apparently Sketch. Half an hour later, they turned up pretty drunk, and after about 15 minutes, we realized they had vanished upstairs. Birthday girl doesn't really want them fooling around in her bedroom, but nobody wants to walk in on them either. So we send the drunkest guy up to call them down. He toddles off upstairs, and then about a minute later comes back into the living room looking pale and distraught. He sits down, and we ask what happened. I went up and opened the door, and he was going down on her, and then he looked over at me, and I thought he was a vampire. There was blood all over his mouth, so I left. Turns out they started fooling around, and it became clear it was her time of the month, but Sketch decided to power on through. We accidentally sent up the one person who, in a drunken haze, was not mentally equipped to deal with this at all. He looked broken for the rest of the night. Yeah, I'm not sure how a guy is supposed to recover from such a sight. That will haunt his dreams for a while, and guarantee that image is going to come back up when he goes down on a girl next time. It cannot be unseen. For the life of me, I can't understand what would compel a guy to continue in that situation, and how did the girl not stop it either? It's just bizarre. I suppose I have to give the guy props for his dedication, though. Story 3. I walked into my webpage design class as a sophomore in high school to find the agriculture teacher using some fingers on my teacher, if you know what I mean. I was making up a test from the previous week after school, and I guess she forgot I was coming. I walked in just time to see the male teacher whipping his hand out from under her dress and her spinning around in the chair. They were both talking over each other, trying to explain that what I saw wasn't in fact some after-school finger fun. I went along with it because I was intimidated by the AG teacher, who I also had that year. He left without any sort of farewell, and I took my test. I felt bad and wished that I would have said something because they were both married. One of them was married to a teacher at the school. Story 4. I used to work at a grocery store when I was 16 to 18 and was a bagger for the majority of that time. We had a handful of employees that were special needs, and they were all great, but one in particular liked to get himself into trouble. We can call him Adam. So Adam had become very good at going to the bathroom during his shifts, sometimes taking 2 hours in one session in the restroom. Generally, our managers had his job coach go and find him and whatever, but for some reason, the job coach was off doing something at this moment, and we wanted to get Adam to come do his job. So I was asked to retrieve him from the restroom. What I walked in on was nothing short of astonishing. Not only had he been hanging out in the bathroom for hours on end, he had found something else to do to pass the time in there. He was fully naked, lying on the ground, clothing folded perfectly next to him, pulling his taffy. The worst part, he had pictures of the employees that were set to graduate high school or college, and he had taken a few of those with him. Story 5. Do you know those squishy balls that have liquid in them, and when you squeeze them, they make larger, translucent balls, usually used to throw around? Well, I come home one day earlier from work, and I walk in on my roommate holding two sides of the thing because it has two elastic, stretchy legs, and just going at it on his Johnson. He didn't hear me, so I just left his facilities and waddled over to my room. He had made a hole in the toy and removed the contents, I assume. I'm going to be honest, I sometimes wonder how it felt. It just goes to show you that anything can be used to get off if you're creative enough. The desperation here is pretty sad, though, because of all the things he could have taken to use, he decides to go all in on a squishy ball toy? There are better options, bro, come on. Story 6. Didn't really walk in on it, as it kind of just started happening right in front of us. At a party, talking with my girlfriend and her friend on the side of the room facing a couch, and then a dude dressed as Superman starts blowing another dude sitting on the couch. Presumably, dude finishes. Then Superman starts choking and coughs up a rubber onto the floor. Superman then got up and walked away like nothing happened. We looked at ourselves and couldn't believe what just happened right in front of us and the fact that no one else at the party seemed fazed by it. Story 7. A couple years ago, I went to my grandparents' house because I needed some stuff I was sure my grandpa had in his garage. I was greeted by my grandma, who told me that grandpa was in the garage doing some work. All good so far. So I go to the garage in the backyard, open the door. Hey, Grandpa, do you remember that? Oh, no. Grandpa was furiously beating his meat to some vintage VHS 80s adult video on a janky CRTV. I noped out of there, but I am sure he saw, I saw, we saw. My brain just froze. I had no idea how to process that situation, so I just walked back home. We live very close to each other, small town. There, I found my brother, looked at him in the eyes and said, "Dude, I just saw Grandpa stroking his Johnson to some vintage videos in the garage." A brief moment of silence, then we proceeded to laugh for like 5 minutes, tears from our eyes. Grandpa was 90 at the time. If at that age you still have the willpower to play with your meat flute, good for you. You go, Grandpa. We never talked about the incident ever again, and Grandpa didn't say a word, but boy, oh boy, the next family reunion was awkward. Yeah, I bet whatever Gramps has on his VHS videos is pretty interesting stuff. That must have been a mind-blowing experience back in the 80s when VHS were all the rage. This old guy would go from like adult magazines to adult films in the comfort of his garage. That must have been so surreal and amazing to think about at that time. I wonder how many times this old guy has done this in the garage, because I guarantee this has been a year after year tradition for him. Hopefully he doesn't blow a fatal gasket during the process, but that would be a heck of a way to go out. Story 8. When I was 13, my buddy found an unlabeled VHS tape in his mom's room, and we of course had to watch it. His mom had recently divorced his dad, so our 13-year-old minds went to the idea that it might be some kind of generic VHS adult film, but at worst, a bootleg copy of Jerry Maguire, which isn't all that bad either way. So we fire up the tape, and it turns out to be a homemade adult film after all. When the woman turned around, we realized it was his mom, and when the man's face came into the frame, we realized it was his mom's sister's husband, my buddy's uncle. My buddy was furious, and he told almost everyone in their family, causing a divorce for his uncle and a rift in the family. Story 9. After 15 years of silence, I'm ready to tell the tale of the XXL grilled stuffed burrito. I was in the military, living in the dorms, and my buddy and I were planning to play Final Fantasy XI and Halo after work. He was going to be late, so I drove to Taco Bell to get dinner for us both, since I knew he'd wanted 2 grilled stuffed burritos and an orange soda. Always the same order. Anyway, I get home, drop his food off, and eat by myself in my room. I called him to see if I could swing by because I left my wallet at his desk, and he said, "Yeah, just give me a second and come on in, I'm changing." Cool. So I waited 5 minutes, went over, and let myself in, and saw my buddy balls deep in his burrito. I quietly backed out of the room before he could notice me, quietly shut the door, and never spoke of it. I got my wallet an hour or so later, and we played some games online, but never brought it up. Strangest thing I've ever seen. But hey, I guess he had to do what he had to do. Story 10. Oh man, I got this one. A fair few years ago now, 15 or maybe even more, I was at a very tame house party with a few people. There were maybe 6 people there tops, and was supposed to be a friendly party with some people, all chilling and drinking accordingly. One guy who came got very drunk, and in a quick amount of time as well. He was starting to get confrontational and rude to some of the people, so we told him to go into another room and chill. We walk in 30 minutes later to find him asleep, and think, he's out for the count, leave him be, and carry on having a decent time otherwise. It was a friend's house who has a much younger sister who was out with her parents somewhere. A few hours later, me and a couple of the guys got hungry and decided to walk into town to a Subway that's open until the early hours. It probably took us an hour to get there and back, but it was worth it for the grub. As we departed, others left as well, with the party host hitting the bed with his girlfriend and the drunk dude still out for the count in the front room, sitting upright in a chair. We still had a key, so we let ourselves in whenever we got back. Well, we got back and all the lights were off, signaling everyone was in bed or gone home. We crept in, switched on the front room light to see formerly passed out drunk dude, still seemingly passed out, but he was now lying on the floor, face down, with his pants around his ankles, with a Barbie doll seemingly shoved head first up his behind. We saw it, turned the lights off, and just backed out of the room, leaving him there. This was back when camera phones were pretty much brand new and expensive, so taking a picture wasn't something we could really do at the time. But if that happened now, I definitely would have. We all went to sleep somewhere else in the house and awoke in the morning to find a drunk dude gone and his poop-covered Barbie doll in the front room. Our party host cleared that up and threw out the remains, and we never really spoke about it ever again. I mean, that's not normal. What did the Barbie doll do to deserve such trauma? I presume this guy inserted the doll by himself, or God forbid this was like a prank by another partygoer while he was fast asleep. These might be questions we actually don't want answers to. At least it was head first, because legs first would have been a painful injury. I wonder what they did with the doll after this. Hopefully, completely burned it up like you would do to retire an old flag. Story 11. Before our first daughter was born, we had to ask one of my wife's coworkers to stop by our condo while we were gone and check on our cats. A simple deal, really. Just make sure they had food and water in case we hadn't left them with enough. My wife had been in full nest mode prior to our going to the hospital and had all the baby clothes washed, organized, and separated. Doubles of things we had generously received at the shower were neatly stacked in bags so we could return them and get different items. The whole house was cleaned and set up so that when we would come back with their baby girl, that she was all we had to be concerned with. We sent my mother-in-law back to the condo late at night as she needed to sleep and there wasn't enough space in the delivery room for everyone. And it wasn't long before she called me because she was wondering what was going on in the condo. Puzzled, I left the hospital and found our home in disarray. Sheets pulled off the bed and crib, stuffed into the washer and dryer. They were starting to mildew as they weren't dried. The comforter haphazardly strung across the downstairs couch. The duplicate clothes we had set aside for returning had all the tags removed and were in various stages of wash. Open takeout containers, left half consumed on the kitchen counter. The tags and packaging from all the open items left piled in a corner, and the cats weren't even attended to. I did what I could, finished washing the sheets, put the crib and bed back in order, and piled all the new unreturnable items into a hamper to deal with later. Fed and watered the cats and threw the trash out. I went back to the hospital and told my wife that her mom just needed some help while getting settled in and had to break the news later on. Going back and forth from the hospital after the birth and before mama and baby were discharged from the hospital, and my mother-in-law assisting, helped get the condo back in reasonable condition prior to bringing the girls home. But there was nothing to be done about the duplicates. Looking back on it, it seems her coworker enlisted the aid of another coworker, and they had intended to help my wife go set it up, but they never completed the task, and actually ignored the fact that these things were already done, and we had not asked them to do any of it. We had the suspicion that her friend had a secret hookup in our bed while we were gone, because why else would you try to wash the sheets and a comforter of a bed that was neatly made and freshly washed? Didn't make the same mistake when we had our second daughter. I just piled the food and water up for the cats and locked all the damn doors. Story 12. I took a foreign language class at a community college. I missed an oral exam one day, so the next class I went in about an hour early to make it up. My 70-year-old male professor was sitting at his desk on his computer. When he saw me, he got very flustered and slammed down his laptop. Now, his computer was connected to the television, so I could still see what he was looking at, and it was an adult film. I noped right out of there and didn't come back until the next week, and we never spoke of it. I didn't turn in any assignment in that class after that, and funny enough, he gave me an A on every one. It would be some old guy professor who doesn't understand technology and thus misses the fact that his adult film is playing on the classroom TV for all to see. Pretty pathetic that your life is at that level of depressing that you have resorted to watching Frisky films in a classroom at a community college. Story 13. I worked at a Cub Scout camp throughout my teen years. We would have severe weather emergencies from time to time if there was a bad thunderstorm, maybe once or twice each summer. Now, this would involve getting all the campers and staff securely in the dining hall, the only real safe place in the camp during a storm. One night, during a severe weather emergency, all the campers were secure in the dining hall when 5 or 6 staff members decided it would be fun to play in a giant puddle that had formed outside. Side effect of having a young staff, I guess. They were yelled at by our program manager and promptly returned to what we're supposed to be doing inside. Lightning struck the puddle about 5 minutes later after they came in. Could have been much worse, but instead we just sang songs and played games with the kids. All was well. Story 14. I'm a first-time mom. Not used to this kind of love you suddenly have for a tiny little terrorist dictating your life. The knowledge of being responsible for another person's life is also something I haven't yet gotten used to. Well, one night, just a few days ago, I check on my daughter who is sleeping in her crib, and I swear there is a huge spider sitting on her cheek. I'm talking greetings from Chernobyl, mutant big spider. Huge! I'm not afraid of spiders, but I could even see the hair. I could almost make braids if I wanted to. I'm ashamed to admit that I stood there frozen for at least 3 seconds, only to then proceed to wake her up while sprinting across the room and taking that ugly spider off of her face. It has been hiding out somewhere since then. I'm paranoid AF and have not let her sleep in that room but in the same bed as me. I'm also extremely scared now that I won't react fast enough if something else were to happen in the future, like her falling over or her running onto the street and me just standing there frozen and paralyzed again. Honestly, I have been walking in on many messed up things, but the lasting effect that it has on me, is painful. And I think it's a little bit different to sit there and process a spider than if your daughter is in imminent danger like a fall or running into traffic. I have no doubt that their parental instincts will kick in and do the right thing. I probably would have stood there too and stared at the spider. And actually, that was the proper move because if the kid is asleep and the spider is just chilling, you don't want to just startle it and then the danger is relatively low at that point. Give yourself time to pause and formulate a plan of action. In the comments, any interesting stories of something scary that just made you stop in your tracks?